Faza'il a'mal, more trouble than it's worth. Warnings given, Zakariyya's refusal to accept those warnings.
He took ahadith from the authentic books of hadith, from Sahih Bukhari, Muslim, Tirmizi, and he went over the main subjects of tasawwuf.
So here we have a return to something I mentioned right at the beginning of this series, and that was the literature review. And I returned to one scholar called Nizar Ibrahim Al-Jarbu. He published this book, Waqafat Ma'a Jama'at Al-Tabligh, which was published in Riyadh, Dar al-Raya in 1991. Within this research study, which was one of about a dozen research studies that Dr. Turkistany mentioned, it mentions Jarbu's interaction with the TJ, in fact with the leaders of the TJ. This work includes some letters that one Saudi scholar and the Emir of the Jama at the time, Sheikh Muhammad ibn Inam al-Hassan Kandahlawi. So letters were sent in between these two, the Saudi scholar and this Emir of the TJ, and the Saudi scholar brought to the Emir's attention certain mistakes in the books of the movement. Among his criticisms, Jarbu noted the movement's usage and propagation of weak and fabricated ahadith. He also objected that the movement made the book of Tablighi Nisab its main source, even though it contained a lot of fallacies, superstitions and Sufism. So this is not something that is a street level sort of interaction. The founders, the heads, the leaders of the TJ are warned via letters, not verbally but literally by written letters, of the weak nature of the hadith found in their source text and the problematic nature of their heavy reliance on that source text. Not only that, we also have this statement, which is found within Dr. Turkistany's thesis, and here you need to focus upon the footnote. It says, Dr. Turkistany says, "We carried out prolonged research with regards to this hadith." This is a hadith that was found in the Faza'il of Namaz. "It is clear that this hadith does not exist, as stated by the author himself." So we've mentioned this before. Sheikh Zakariyya does say that I can't find this hadith anywhere in any book, and he states that he can't find it in any book, so that's quite straightforward. Despite this fact, some scholars wrote to the author in objection to borrowing that hadith and the likes. So he's told by scholars not to do that, not to mention such hadith, and they're actually telling him to delete this from his book, yet he persists with his stance. And here is the source and the page number of where that incident took place. So he's warned in writing, as are the emirs of the TJ warned in writing, and they still persist. In fact, we have an actual warning letter. This is excellent because it's found on page 264, and it says, "As for the fabricated hadith, that Sheikh Muhammad Zakariyya had denied the existence of this kind of hadith in his book." So he claimed there wasn't any sort of fabricated mawdu' hadith found in his book. He wrote a reply to a letter that he had received, and it's letter number 32, and the footnote gives the source number. It says, this is the person who's writing to Sheikh Zakariyya. "I had an argument with a man because of your book, Faza'il Namaz. He said all the hadith in this book are fabricated and have weak chains. He also said many bad things about you. I would like you to tell me whether they are fabricated hadith in this book." And this is what Sheikh Zakariyya replies: "There are no fabricated ahadith in this book, but some have been labelled as being weak." So read the rest of the letter for Sheikh Zakariyya's response. This is a man who is told in writing, the emirs are told in writing, the Jama is made well aware of these fabrications, these fallacies and these weak mawdu' narrations. They carry on regardless. That's just for your education. Enough with the TJ, enough with the FA. Now we come to a superb thesis. This is one of my favourite theses of all time in regards to hadith sciences, and it's called On the Common Link Theory by Fahd al-Hamoudi, and it was submitted as a doctoral thesis in October 4th of October 2006 to McGill University in Canada. And this thesis comes upon the tails of on the coattails of the Goldziher thesis that I mentioned, because it concerns probably the most important Orientalist in the study of Hadith after Goldziher, and that's Joseph Schacht. And here I give you the index of what the thesis contains, so I'll give it to you for a few seconds. You can pause it, have a look at it. But the second page of the index talks about some of the mistakes, and these are quite critical mistakes, that Schacht made in regards to his common link phenomenon. And amongst these mistakes are things like the unfamiliarity with Rijal literature, misapprehending Mustalah al-Hadith. So this is to do with the terminology, and I've done a couple of episodes on that topic. The distinction between matan and isnad, which is something that I have covered, and flaws in his methodology as a whole. So what exactly is the common link theory? The common link theory, in a nutshell, is on this page here. Pause this, you will need to pause this, and you will need to read this a couple of times to understand. But basically what Schacht is saying is that isnads have a tendency to grow backwards, meaning they are fabricated by later generations and they grow backwards and they're given fallacious authenticity. And it says, in general, we can say the more perfect the isnad, the later the tradition, because it has back growth. And then there's this idea of a family isnad. So it says, whenever traditions claim an additional guarantee by presenting themselves as transmitted amongst members of one family, i.e. from father to son and grandson, from aunt to nephew, etc., this can be a sign that this is definitely, because it's given this fake family sort of link, it can be a sign that is something that pretends to be authentic. In fact, it's not authentic simply because it exists as a family sort of isnad. On the face of it, that to Orientalist ears that sounds quite interesting, but if you think about it, if a father and a son, or nephews and nieces, aunts and uncles, are part of one family, they're more likely to share information and narrate information to each other. So it doesn't seem like that would be something that would be fallacious. In fact, it would be something kept within family tradition, and if it's a practice, it's likely to be something to be an authentic practice. Anyway, what Dr. Hamoudi concludes in this on this point is this statement here, and he quotes another scholar called Younis, who we'll talk about because there's a whole doctoral thesis dedicated to Younis himself. And he says, although Younis comprehends the significance of the common link theory to Schacht's critique of prophetic tradition, he applies it within his own work incorrectly. So Goldziher started it all off, Schacht carried it on, and people like Younis, James Robson, John Burton, John Wansborough, all these sorts of other people, and there's many others, all these other sorts of people just ran with the theory. And he says, if he was aware of the literature and its implications, he would have recognized that the evidence he adduced actually works against his own argument. He's talking about the Rijal literature, which is something that we may need to go into in a few episodes. Indeed, if Younis or Schacht had interpreted the evidence correctly, he would have facilitated an accurate reinterpretation that is more in line with the discourse and critique of muhaddiths. Basically, do your research, study the literature as it is, instead of cherry-picking literature, and you would have come to a better conclusion than the one you did. Stay tuned for many more parts.